Hi, everybody. Welcome to Estimating Tasks. This can be as interactive as you want. We welcome questions all the way through. You have to talk into this box. So the first time someone raises his or her hand to ask a question, I will be throwing this box at someone to toss to that person. Remind me to do that, please. So estimating tasks. Whoa. I almost lost it. My name is Rose Pruyne, and I'm a project manager here at Penn State. I've been here for longer than I care to admit. I've been an Agile practitioner since about 2005.
I'm Lisa Komidar. I used to be from Penn State until recently. I left in May to join a IT service company named Fusion Storm. I have been practicing Agile for not quite as long as Rose. I think I've been doing it for 4 years in an off and on capacity, but really focusing on Agile in my career and my educational track in my own profession. And Rose has been my Agile coach for the most part, so kudos to her.
Glad to do it. Quick overview about what we're going to do in this session. We're going to be talking about high-level estimating. I'll walk you through high-level estimating and why it's an absolute bear. Lisa is going to talk about time-based estimates, which are also extremely difficult, and there are a lot of issues around time-based estimates. Then I'm going to step back in and talk about story pointing, and story points are based on estimates that are made using effort plus complexity, which is a whole different way of estimating when stuff's going to get done. And if it's used correctly, it can be more accurate. And then we're going to wrap up the session with planning poker, which is a fun activity, and you can get through effort estimating fairly quickly using that tool. So high-level estimating, starting out with a question for you. How many of you have been on a project or DevOps release cycle where everything went absolutely exactly as was planned at the beginning?
Yeah.
So you have probably, whether you've been a member of the team or a leader of that team, project manager, functional manager, doesn't matter, even on Agile efforts, you've probably heard that question that always comes up at the very beginning from your key stakeholders, from your sponsor, from your customer, definitely. When will this be done? And if that question doesn't make you slightly nauseated, you're an unusual person. So high-level estimating, of course, happens at the very beginning, which in and of itself introduces an amazing amount of risk. And it's easy to very quickly lose focus on the real powerful purpose of that high-level estimating at the beginning, which is mainly so that you can prioritize the work, because you've got a big pile of work that needs to be done to get this release out the door or this project completed. And one of the best things that you can do is to sequence and prioritize that work to help you and your team focus. It's easy to lose track of the reason for those high-level estimates. It's also to identify some resource needs so that you can figure out, if you do need a designer or an extra developer or somebody that can do .NET or somebody that can do the Java. Those are the two main reasons why high-level estimating has use at the beginning of an effort. And it's also to give your key stakeholders, your leadership, your customer, a ballpark estimate, and the key word is ballpark. It's not about making promises that you cannot keep, that are going to come back and bite you in the end. And it's really, really hard to answer that early question without wanting to make a promise. So it takes a lot of strength as a team member and as a leader to pull back from doing that for obvious reasons. And that brings us to using waterfall for change-driven product development. And honestly, all of us are in IT, right? So any kind of releases that we're pushing out, any kind of project that we're going to be a part of is going to be at least somewhat change-driven just by the nature of technology, right? So using waterfall with a change-driven project or change-driven effort immediately introduces some risks. I'll walk you through it, what happens. So in a waterfall project, you start out with inception, and that's where, a business case is written and a charter. They start to develop a charter. They may not even have selected a project manager or even the team yet. And a lot of times what you see, even in the business case, is a high-level timeline with some milestones, which is already giving those high-level estimates out, right? And you'll see that kind of information frequently in the charter too, and it's very high level. Then elaboration starts, and that's where the project manager kicks in. And in a waterfall project, they call it a work breakdown structure. In Agile, it's called a backlog. And what that is just the hierarchy of all that work that needs to be done. And that's where the project manager works with the team and other subject matter experts to estimate how much time it's going to take each little piece of work, right? And adds it up. And then the team kicks in and they start to actually do the work. And in waterfall, that's called execution, which always seems like a really bleak term. But they're doing the work. And then eventually the project grinds to a close and everybody's happy and it hits a deadline. But the problem is with waterfall and change-driven product development is that the estimation on when work is going to be done happens right at the beginning. And that's when it is by far the most difficult to figure out what's involved, right? Now, it gets easier once you get into the execution phase where the people who are actually doing the work are getting their hands dirty because they start to discover the hidden work. They start to discover blockers and issues and complexities. So they could do a much more accurate job of estimating the work to be done, but that's right in the middle of the project. So in order to readjust estimates in waterfall, there's a pretty heavy-duty, change management process where you actually have to submit a change and sort of do the paperwork to readjust estimates. And then, of course, when you get close to delivery, that's when your team is the most familiar with the work that needs to be done. But by then, it's way too late to make any kind of accurate estimation. It's already been done. And that's why when you get into that construction phase and near completion, that's where you see a lot of waterfall projects start to slide. And they start to miss milestones. And we've all gotten those emails, right, where, hey, the rollout date has been changed to December 21, right? So we've all gotten those sorts of missives about various projects. So the rollout date just keeps getting pushed farther and farther into the future. For change-driven product development, which I would say we're all involved in, if we're in IT, we're dealing with change all the time, whether it's a project or our DevOps work, it doesn't matter. And with something that's change-driven, it's far easier and more effective to take that iterative approach. And it's definitely easier to estimate work as it's being executed and delivered. So instead of that inception and elaboration phase, we have work iterations, or you can call them sprints too, where the team keeps estimating just enough work to be done and then adjusting their estimates as they go along. So the variance is really pretty good. It's much closer to being spot on, right? So there's that. But the thing is, whether it's a waterfall project or an Agile effort or the beginning of a whole release cycle on your DevOps team, there's always that beginning. And there are always going to be key stakeholders who are going to ask, when is the whole thing going to be done? So it's really hard to avoid that question, no matter what kind of project it is. So there are some tricks to help you to give as accurate an estimation as you can. Yes, sir. Box. Okay, you ready? I'm throwing it at you. You ready?
You're using two terms in terms of the waterfall and the agile. Can you define them?
Sure,
Because
what are the
I've-
terms?
Waterfall and
Waterfall
Agile.
and agile. You're talking about these ways of rolling stuff out
Yeah.
and project managing, and I'm waiting for kind of like a
I would be
definition of what that
more
is,
than
and I'm not
happy
sure what
to
that is.
define those. So, how many of you are familiar with waterfall? So, at waterfall projects are planned in advance. So, all of the planning and all of the work identification and the estimating on work and all of that is done very early on. Very early on. And then it's locked in. And the only way that you can like make a change to that whole scenario is to do this thing called change management, where it's like, uh-oh, and then you have to do some paperwork and get permission. Yeah. So so they call it waterfall because the way that it's managed frequently, they use tools that will actually depict the work in this waterfall fashion. This depends on this, depends on this, depends on the, and it works fine if you've got a very predictable project where you know exactly what's going to happen, although I kind of question if that's actually a project and not a process. But, and waterfall started actually in construction, the construction industry, and it makes a heck of a lot more sense out there in construction to plan a bunch of stuff, because you wouldn't want to build a bridge without a crap ton of planning up front. So Agile does it very differently. With Agile, you capture all of the requirements. You capture as many of the requirements as you can up front, and they're frequently known as features, and they get broken down into smaller chunks. But the thing is that makes Agile completely different from Waterfall is that instead of all that planning being done up front, there's just enough planning to get the ball rolling. So they do work iterations, which are usually like a couple of weeks. And so the first
Yes.
one or two work iterations, maybe a month of work, is taking some of the top priority features and then kind of breaking them down into chunks of work that then they can do some real planning and estimating on. And then they shove it into a work iteration. And that just keeps happening again and again in this cyclic fashion. So does that help?
Yeah, no.
There's
Thanks for
some
asking that.
terminology that you'll hear thrown out that is an Agile subset. Like you hear Scrum, you hear Kanban or Kanban, you hear Lean, you hear Six Sigma. Those are all just varieties of Agile or the sub-methods of Agile, but they follow under the Agile umbrella.
So thank you so much for asking that question. I love answering that question.
Yeah.
Any other questions before I keep rolling along? So you're still going to be asked that question, when is the whole thing going to be done? And so what you need to do is keep in mind that you're going to give them an estimation, and it is going to have a wide variance just by the very nature of what you are doing and when you are doing it, and make sure that your team understands that and your key stakeholders, including your customer and your sponsor, understands that, so that you're not being held to something that sounds like a promise. And then some tricks that you can do is when you're estimating, when you're giving that estimate for the whole project, start at that feature level. And what I mean by feature level, a feature, like just what it sounds like, it's a chunk of work or the deliverable that is going to give business value to the customer. So here's an example of what I mean by a feature. Say you're putting together, it could be an open source project, or it could be a purchase system, and you're going to configure it so that it's a newsy content management like website, maybe WordPressy in some ways, but it's going to be pushing out news. And so your customer wants readers to comment on the articles, right? Now, to your customer and to many people, that seems like a no-brainer, right? Yeah, of course. It's great to have those comments coming in for a number of reasons. But because you all are, developers or team leads or sysadmins or managers of teams that do that sort of stuff, you know that the devil is in the details, right? Yeah. So even something that seems as simple as this, there's all kinds of things that can come up, complexities that come up. So at that feature level, you're going to need to do the best you can at the beginning of that project or whatever it is to unfold it enough so that you understand what that feature's about and you get a grasp of the complexities. And that's with the understanding that you don't have a whole lot of time to go deep into it. You're going to do the best you can. And whether you use Storypoints at that time or hours, you need to accept that you're going to have to adjust that accuracy as you go along, and everybody else needs to accept that too. So some stuff to watch out for when you're getting requirements from all those people who give you the requirements, and you're going to recognize this stuff. Any of you who've ever put together a system, or you're going to get requirements that are impractical because customers, stakeholders, they how many people, really understand that system? It's the team that has their hands on it that understand it. So you're going to get requirements that sound kind of wacky. They might be total scope breakers. They might be just completely outside what the system is for even. Or they could be just so complex that there needs to be a whole discussion about, and maybe this is like a project phase 2 or something. So you've all gotten impractical requirements before, right? And what do you do about it? You talk. You have some conversations. And you do a bunch of level setting. So watch out for those impractical requirements. And a lot of times the customer, and you've all experienced this too, I know, they want something, but it's not really very well they don't really understand what it is that they're asking for. And that's largely because they often will tend to kind of jump into that technology. They'll say, Ohio State has that thingy, and I just love that thingy, and I want it on our site. And they don't really understand what they're asking for. They just like it, right? So a thing that helps there actually is to kind of switch their brains around and use some of you I know are familiar with user stories, but there is a technique, a tool, if you will, called a user story that follows a really simple format. It's a whole other presentation, but if you use user stories when you're pulling requirements out of your customers, it gets them thinking not about the tool, the functionality, the bling, Ohio State site. It gets them thinking about what they need to get done. So then they're focused on, I need to do this so that I can do this. And that helps them a tremendous amount to understand what they're really asking for. And then, of course, it helps you and it helps your team. So poorly understood requirements by the customer can be a real pain if you're trying to estimate. Risky requirements, they're going to come to you with this too, of course, right? Some of the things they might ask for, like a common thing is, they want this feature, which is a great feature, but then they also want this feature here. So they want the system to do this, but also this, and the two features actually clash with one another. So that happens a lot, right? Or it could be, a lot of the really fancy stuff that gets asked for in any kind of system poses usability issues and accessibility issues too. So you could be running up against 8069, with some of the bling that individuals ask for, or it could be introducing a security risk, or it could be just be introducing so much crazy back-end coding that in itself involves. So all kinds of risks comes up when they come at you with requirements. And for all of these, it's all about having conversations and managing expectations. So the customer might very well understand what they're asking for, at least to a certain point, but it might be unclear or confusing to your team. In which case, and really it's true for all of these, bring your team into the discussions, bring the people who are actually doing the stuff, bring them in so that they can ask questions too. And your team is going to be absolutely wonderful with figuring out if a requirement is impractical too, right? and risky, all of that. So your team is going to be absolutely golden for helping with these conversations. And then this is the worst one of all, and it's the hardest one of all. It's that hidden work. How many times have you put a functionality into whatever, and then you realize, oh my God. So hidden work is everywhere. And your customer, your stakeholders, they're not really going to be a whole lot of help with you finding that out. It's going to be you and your team. And once again, that's why an iterative approach is better, because you're not launching into this huge endeavor and then discovering hidden work, which can be mighty awkward. So do all those make sense? Any questions at this point? Sweet. But especially watch out for this. This is like a top level thing. Memorize this. Watch out for your sponsor or whoever, the person holding the reins, the customer. Watch out for getting handed a project or a set of releases that have both a fixed deadline and a fixed scope. That is deadly. Think about it. So say you've got a customer that wants absolutely every feature that's listed. Well, that's just great. If that's what they want, fine. But in that case, there is no leeway at all, right? You are pinned down on delivering every single one of those features, in which case you need some leeway with the deadline. You absolutely need leeway with the deadline. Likewise, if this system is needed by the first day of classes and absolutely no later, then you've got to be able to negotiate the scope. And that's where prioritization comes in, and phasing and all of those discussions. So you see why this fixed deadline plus fixed scope introduces an ungodly amount of risk, and you should never agree to it. If you possibly can avoid it, never agree to it. Tell them that Rose said don't do that.
That's what I do.
It's worked for her.
Yeah.
So far. So I'm going to hand it over to Lisa, and she's going to talk about time-based estimates and why they can be a real bear.
So how many of you guys like it when your boss comes up to you and says, can you tell me how much time it's going to take you to do that job?
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, we all love it, right? Not. So traditional estimates are based on time, right? We've all been there, we've all been asked to provide them, and we all cringe every time. Time is really not the way that we want to do this. So we have a project manager that says, how long do you think it's going to be to finish this thing? I don't know, 4 to 6 weeks, well, maybe 8. So the 4 is very optimistic. 6, I'm not so sure now. I'm thinking, let's just go with 8 because I'm going to try to be pessimistic on my guess. So the PM does the typical project management time estimation calculation that we all learn, and we come up with 6 weeks. It's going to take you 6 weeks of your work to do this task. Yeah, right. Wait, where's the square? We got to pass it. The catch box. Toss it across the way. Nice.
Oof. Hello. Is there really a formula that project managers learn?
That is a formula
Do
that
they
project
actually
managers
average
learn.
These numbers and say
Yes,
this is
it is
true?
on the
Filthy
PMI
secret.
exam, I believe.
That's
yeah.
a real thing.
Yeah,
Okay,
that
thank
is
you.
a real thing.
And it's completely useless.
Yeah. So no one trusts the estimate. They know it's probably wrong. So they're some of the downfalls of this is they're overly optimistic. So I'm going to say I'm a database admin, and you've asked me to create a new database, and I want you to think that I'm really good. So I'm going to say that this entire new database that's going to operate the whole university, well, just the payroll system, is going to take me 2 weeks. I'm going to have it done for you in 2 weeks. You're going to be able to dump all your payroll information into that database in 2 weeks. Yeah, right. I can see some heads shaking. So now you're stuck to that 2-week timeline, and you're better well stay right on scope with it. Don't creep at all, because there's no way you're going to do that in 2 weeks. So this is a very bad idea. And at that time, that database admin would rather go on vacation on week 2 than face up to reality that, hey, there's no way I'm going to have this done. And while I'm on vacation, I put my application in at 30 places because I just don't feel comfortable coming back and telling you guys, hey, I was that good that I knew I could get this done. And then if they do get it done in 2 weeks, well, they're missing some very key components of that database. Oh, so what? You wanted the employees in there? I thought it was just a payroll system or a payroll database. So you have left out some very important pieces. And usually we estimate it way too early. We don't have all the details. You know, if payroll system, are we going to insist that the employees receive their payroll through their bank accounts, or are we going to generate paper checks? Or are we doing a combination of these items? So there's all kinds of questions and everything that need to really be thought through and discussed. Or they're overly pessimistic. I'm just going to pad this a little bit. Yeah, I could create that website in 2 weeks. It's a real easy website. It's just giving some information. But I'm going to say I'm going to do it in 10 weeks just to be safe. So often the estimates are asked of one individual, but there's a team that's working on this. Yeah, you're asking me how long it's going to take for me to complete a website. However, I have a UX designer. I need her input. How long is it going to take her to do the mock-ups and come up with the right branding? And then I have another person who's going to actually do all the JavaScript functionality. When do they come in? Maybe the requirements have some really detailed JavaScript that we need to do. I have back-end considerations. Do I need a new server for this? Oh my gosh, I have to contact the server team to get their information. So there's so much information that we don't even gather yet, and we're already asking for time estimates on a finished product. That's why you don't use time estimates, you go to Storypoints. And Rose will explain Storypoints.
I love to talk about Storypoints. So let's go back to that slide for just a bit. So time estimates do not take into account the amount of work that a team can complete within a given time. That's called performance data. So keep that in mind. How many of you have worked with user stories or have worked in an Agile? Oh, that's great. It's good to see. And so how many of you have worked with story pointing? A couple of you. Okay, cool. So to get started on this discussion of story points, let's go back to that feature that I showed you earlier. Users need to be able to comment on articles. So that's still pretty high level in the scheme of the system that we're building, even though we don't really build systems much anymore, do we? We configure them. It's high level, and any kind of estimate that you put on that feature early on totally needs to be adjusted. Plus, at this level of description, you can't really get started on the work for it because you really need to unfold it, right? So the next step is to unfold this feature into some smaller components. And here are 3 smaller components of this feature. There are more, but these are 3. And what are these? Somebody tell me what those 3 little things are. Those are user stories. For those of you not familiar with user stories, here's a 10-cent lesson on them. User stories are really powerful and really useful because they get your customer and whoever, stakeholders, whoever, focused on what they need to do to get their work done, to get their stuff done, and it gets them not thinking about all that technology. They're thinking about what they need in their business process, and they always follow that pattern. And once you get good at working with your end users and customers to write these, you can cut through a lot of BS. They always start out with as someone who needs to do something. I need some kind of functionality, some kind of tool, so that I can, and in this case, so I can fix the errors, not look stupid. That's the business value. So that I can part, that's the business value. Get them thinking in terms of business value, and you'll get much clearer requirements. So there's my spiel on user stories. So Storypoints are a tool that is used by your team being your developers, your tech lead, your testers, your designers, your technical writers, whoever makes up that team. Storypoints is mainly their tool at this stage in the game. Now, Storypoints can be used at a very high level. I've seen them even used to estimate an entire project. It's been done. They can be, and they're frequently used to estimate the size of features, and then there's another type of a bigger story called an epic. Epics are just big stories that need more unfolding. And you stop me if I use any more terms that are unfamiliar. But where they really pack a lot of wallop is when the team gets pretty close to when they're going to actually do that work. And then the story points are applied to those stories. And the stories are small enough so that the team can accomplish the work on them inside of whatever your work iteration size is. This is if you are an Agile group. And work iterations tend to be about 2 weeks. And if you're not doing that, it's a great planning tool. So story points are not based on time. They are not based on time. I have seen some really horrible like project management systems, project management tools. There's one out there that's like really popular right now, where they actually say that a story point equals 1 hour. A pox on them. That is so wrong. Story points are not associated with time. They are associated with effort and complexity. And if you think in terms of effort and complexity and think in terms of performance data on your team, you're going to get far, far more accurate estimations. So think about effort and complexity for a minute. Cogitate on those two words for a couple of seconds. Effort, something can take a lot of effort, but it might not be terribly complex. But nevertheless, it's going to take a lot of time, right? The one thing that I can think of off the bat that would take a lot of effort, but might not be terribly complicated, is some manual content migration into some new system. It could be a staff assistant is doing that manual content migration. Well, it's not terribly complicated, but it's going to take some time. Complexity, it might, depending on who's working on it, it might take a much shorter time, but it might be, quite complicated. So effort and complexity, very good thing to base your estimates on. I wish I could go more into that because there's so much that I could say, but we only have, 90 minutes. So as I said, story points can be used at the higher level, but they're estimated close to when that work's going to be done. And I'm bringing you back to that Agile flow where the team plans, works, deploys. Plans, works, deploys. And it's that kind of cycle. Yes, sir. Now it's you, box.
We need the box.
Oh, are those story points often, though, what end up being feature requests? And wouldn't those necessarily come earlier in the planning process?
There might be story points applied to a feature early on, but the feature is going to be too big to move into like a work iteration. So before your team can work on that feature, break it down into smaller chunks.
Typically, I've seen it go, you have the whole product or the whole project. What's it going to do? And then underneath that, you have features. These are the features that we want out of this project. And then each one of those features are broken down to epics. These are the main items in those epics. And then you break it down to the user stories.
Are you saying epic?
An epic is a big story.
Yeah.
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 That's just a big story that needs to be.
No,
Yeah.
You have the features and the epics and then
And,
right?
I'll be honest with you. Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry to sling the terms.
Yeah.
No.
but-
It's just, I mean, when you think of an epic is like the big story.
Big.
It is
so
big.
I think
It
that
is
would start at
big, but it's
Well, and I'll be honest with you. On a lot of the Agile projects that I've been on, we spend very little time, if any, like estimating epics. You know, we just say, is this big, small, big, or large?
yeah.
And a lot of times that's enough. You know, okay, it's big, whatever. Tie that in with the prioritization, and that's enough at that point. And then when you break it down, that's when you start to apply the story points.
Okay.
So
Box coming over.
throw the box.
Just make sure nothing's open over there.
Oh no, good catch.
You just brushed on what I wanted to hear you talk about, which is t-shirt sizing. I find t-shirt sizing at that epic level
Yeah.
delineates enough between the smaller stories and the larger projects, like just totally different mindsets.
Yeah.
Yeah, we use buckets too. You know,
What's a
you
bucket?
can bucket sizes, t-shirt sizes. The thing is only like you kind of clump them into like 3 or 4 different sizes at that
And if you
point.
use that kind of blunt instrument right up front, it also gets your stakeholders away from being picayune about the estimates. You know, it kind of gets them out of that mindset. So like, remember how I said start at the feature level? What you could do is, you know, take your features, apply small, medium, and large to each feature, and then apply some, and it can be pretty arbitrary. It really can. You know, apply a number to large, a number to medium, a number to small.
and
Add
it
that
helps
up
with
and share it.
that's mainly used to help with the priority of your work.
That's right.
Right. So you might have 5 major main features, and you're seeing that feature number 1 has a high, is like an extra large T-shirt, and the other features are only mediums. Well, then they can say, okay, but is the first feature really a priority to us, or do we just want to go ahead and get 2, 3, 4, and 5 done and skip number 1 until the end?
So one of the things that people have trouble with is this. Story points, because they're not based on time and are used within a team, they are tailored to the uniqueness of the team. So the team actually decides how much a story point equals. And that might seem really strange because what I'm talking about here is completely relative, and it's true. So what a story point might mean to one team, this other team over here, it might mean something different. And as bizarre as that sounds, it doesn't matter. It does not matter, because remember what I said at the beginning of the story points discussion. This is about performance data. It's all about performance data applied to your team. So who the heck cares what the other team's doing? You're not comparing team to team, or you shouldn't be. And you're sure as heck not doing what frequently is done in waterfall, where you estimate your stuff based on some previous project, which to me is crazy, because think about how much things change in the world of IT. So you're basing estimates on this previous project that was somewhat similar. So even though it might seem really freaky, story points are completely tailored to the uniqueness of a single team. They decide. So like I said, they agree on what a story point equals. And if your team is new to it, they're going to really suck at it at first, and they're going to suck for maybe, 3 or 4 of their work iterations. But I've never seen it fail. Then they get really good, and then they get amazingly good. And it's hard to describe what happens at that point. They start to hit this stride, and their ability to plan how much work they can do becomes incredibly accurate. And of course, there's a lot of power in that, right? So to help your team along, you can do something like this. This is one way to introduce them. Just have everyone agree on what 1 point might equal. So maybe 1 point is fixing a small CSS error, not deploying it, because that's other stuff, right? But just fixing that CSS error, testing it locally, making it work. Maybe it's, if some teams like to also, put like meetings and that kind of stuff into their work iterations and apply points to that as part of the planning, because after all, it is stuff that people have to do, right? So maybe, if you do that, and it's up to you really, maybe 1 point is that work session or that meeting. Maybe it's reading a blog article on the new add-on that just came out, or the Helsinki upgrade, so that you're getting some information you need. 2 points might be something, and this is up to your team entirely. Then they might decide, okay, so 2 points is equal to, okay, writing a KB article on something that I know cold. I can write this in my sleep. Maybe that's 2 points. But of course, writing is complicated in itself, right? Good writing is. So maybe that's 2 points, or maybe it's fixing a few very minor codes. Not deploying the fix, but just fixing those and testing locally, maybe unit testing, maybe integrated testing, maybe not. 3 points, writing some instructions, writing a KB article on something you don't quite know as well. So you've got to play with the system, do some research. 3 points. 5 points, whatever, you know, the presentation that we're giving to you today, we've given in various forms in the past, so we didn't do it from scratch. But if you're giving a presentation from complete scratch, maybe that's 5 points. It's quite a bit of work doing that, as you know. So you probably noticed that I skipped some numbers when I was giving those estimates. And there's a reason for that. And who can tell me what this is?
The Fibonacci sequence.
Yeah, this is the Fibonacci, or slightly modified fib. If it were the true fib, you know, that would be at 21, and so on. Who can tell me why I'm showing you a modified Fibonacci sequence? Okay, so there are a couple of reasons why when teams are estimating, instead of estimating like, okay, that's 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, this is a 4-pointer, this is a 7-pointer, oh, this is a 6.5-pointer, and then they start to quibble, and no, it's a 7, no, it's a 6.5, no, it's a 7 point. So the mod fib actually will do a couple of bits of magic for you. It helps a great deal to prevent your team from quibbling and splitting hairs, simply because there are gaps. And you notice, like a Fibonacci sequence does, the higher the number, the greater the gap. And that's also preventing a lot of quibbling and hair splitting, and it's also giving everyone a constant visual reminder that if they've got a story, God forbid, they've got a story that's 40 points in size, well, by virtue of it being large, obviously they didn't unfold it enough, right? So they're back at high-level estimating, and what do we know about high-level estimating? Yeah, huge variance, it's inaccurate, and there's hidden work, and there's all those problems with it. So this is a constant reminder that if they've got a story that's even 13, whenever I've been like a Scrum Master or product owner or whatever in some kind of Agile endeavor, our teams have always stopped at 5. If a story is larger than 5, it needs to be broken down some more, because there might be hidden work, there's probably missing information, and it's not terribly likely that stories sized 8 or larger are even going to get finished inside a couple of weeks. And it's absolutely deadly to drag stories from iteration to iteration. That's a death march.
See, I differ a little bit on my approach there. I will let them go up to 13, sometimes 20. They're allowed to go there.
But depends on the size of your team.
We need to talk about it and the experience of the team. The team I worked with was a newer team to Agile. They were always used to the time, and so they kept wanting to go time. And so I allowed them until they became more professional about the story, putting story points versus time. I allowed them to go big with a lot of discussion, so we allowed a lot of time in our planning meetings for it.
And
So-
it's up to the team. You know,
Yeah.
it's whatever the team can handle. So how does this work exactly? You know, I've given you a lot of theory, I guess you could say. So consider the scenario. So you've got a team, and your team has been using story points, and they've been using iterations, and they've been using that iterative plan, develop, deploy for, let's say, 9 months to a year, and they've gotten good at it. At this point, they're very consistent with their points estimation. When teams first start out with it, they're really inconsistent, and they argue and they bicker, and then they get better and better and better. And they get amazingly good. I've seen this happen again and again. So at this point, and it'll take a few iterations for that to happen. This team is solid with their estimations, and they know, because they've been doing this 2 weeks after 2 weeks after 2 weeks for 9 months. At this point, they know absolutely that they are capable of completing, on average, 30 points for every work iteration. That's the performance data. Nobody pinned that performance data on them. They generated it themselves, which is another nice thing about this process. It's a self-organizing thing. The team is coming up with this performance data and proving it, right? So they own it. So they know that, and you know that as the lead or the project manager or whoever you are, that person who has to face those stakeholders, right? So now we've got this customer who has fallen in love with this new feature, that's like way down in the work backlog, and there are these other priorities sitting here, but this customer wants this feature and he wants this feature yesterday. Well, okay, cool. It's going to be all right, because your team knows what they can complete inside a couple of weeks. They've got that data and they've proven it again and again. They've also unfolded that feature. Maybe right when that request rolled in, they said, okay, this is top priority, let's unfold it. So they've had those discussions, and they've unfolded the feature, and they've done all the talking with the customer and all that discussion that needs to happen, and they've created their user stories, which are the little bits of the feature that are easy to estimate. They've done all that, and they know they've got all the user stories, and they've estimated them, and they've added them up, and it's 180 points. Well, fine. So your team is capable of completing 30 points in a couple of weeks. That's called velocity. That's another term. You don't need to remember it for the test.
You do have a test.
So therefore, the math is pretty much a no-brainer, right? They can complete it in 12 weeks. And it's not a crazy promise, and it's not even a wag. It's not a wag at all. I mean, unless, 18 members of your team get really sick, but that's life, right? So based on what previous performance data, you can go back and say, all right, you can have this in 12 weeks. That's pretty powerful. And you can say it without blushing. And your team is confident too. So Storypoints, if you use them that way, and you can't use them in isolation without the other process. I should make that clear. So there are some other parts of this process that I've hinted at least, that make the Storypoints actually work for you. They can enable you to provide really pretty damned accurate estimations. And because they're based on performance data, you know that going forward, that's going to be stable because your team is stable. They have achieved a steady state. Now, they might improve incrementally, and they should. So they might ultimately get to a point where, hey, they can crank out 40 every iteration. Nothing wrong with that, right? But they are at a steady state, and they know it, so they're confident in their ability too. Nobody's blushing when they go back to the customer and say, yeah, you got it in 12 weeks, but you also are able to manage expectations now. So yeah, your customer wants that feature and wants it yesterday. You can say you can have it in 12 weeks, but let's look at the backlog that you have discussed with us. You have these other 3 priorities right here. You can have this in 12 weeks, but these got to move down in priority. And you can say that with a lot of strength because you've got performance data backing you up. You can't do that without really good data behind you. It's just the way it is. And it gets you out of that making wags, making some kind of promise or estimate that you hope you can achieve. It's not perfect, but it's a heck of a lot better than the alternative, right? You've got a lot of credibility, as a project manager, a functional manager, whoever you are, and your team's got amazing credibility too, right? So you're also coming from that point of strength. So that's what it can do for you and your customers, as far as managing expectations, prioritizing, and giving really accurate estimates. And that's awesome, but it also really is so good for your team, because I can't tell you how good it feels to a team to keep working at this and then realize we can do 30 every 2 weeks. That's pretty cool. But then you combine that with continual process improvement. Okay, so then your team fixes something in the environment. They get better integrated testing, or maybe they improve their behavior, they improve their environment, they improve their process, and they get better and better. A good thing to combine with that whole process is just doing a retrospective with the team every couple of weeks or so. Hey, what worked, what didn't, how can we improve? And then they can keep getting to the point where they can do 40 every couple of weeks or 50, and that's also very satisfying to the team. It can help the team gain increasing confidence and the individual too. And that is a huge morale builder for teams. So that's Storypoints in a nutshell. Are there any questions about that whole system before I hand it over to Lisa and you play planning poker? Box?
Where to? Okay. I'm so bad at
I have a question. I know that works great for large projects, but how does it work in an environment where your work is unpredictable, and particularly support?
Oh, yeah, so you can do it in support too. Storypoints are very frequently used outside of projects completely, like if you've got a DevOps team. So for support, depending on the kind of support you do, you would do similar planning. The one thing that you with support that you got to work out, and I've been on teams, especially with DevOps teams, because I've been on DevOps teams a lot, and the teams that I've been on in that capacity, there's always that support component, and of course, when you've got that support component, unexpected stuff happens, right? And so what do you do with that? Well, that's all part of your planning. So I'll just give you an example. So when I was on the WebLion team, which doesn't exist anymore, we were doing the Pruyne content management system, and we were also supporting, so we were getting support tickets in, and if some big support issue comes in, your work is interrupted, right? So we would do things like appoint one individual to be doing that support, and then in addition to that, we would do another thing called capacity estimating. So there's that velocity, but then there's also the capacity. So frequently at the beginning of each sprint, we would say, okay, what's everyone's capacity? You're out 2 weeks, okay. You're out through days, okay. And just plan all that kind of contingency stuff. It's not perfect, but nothing is ever. But yeah, when you've got that support component, you gotta factor that in. So because your team might always have that support component, you will, as a team, not be able to complete as many story points as, say, some team that doesn't have that. Just factor it in. So this team over here that doesn't have to do that, maybe they can do 40 every couple of weeks, but yours is 20. Plus, remember, story points are unique to the team. So does that make sense? Yeah, that support component can really complicate things, but you can factor it in.
This
and then
also allows
there's
you
always
to-
going to be.
Yeah,
Go
this
ahead.
allows you to build that performance data that Rose talked about and build that velocity. So you know what your team members can do over a period of time. You know that historically, in any given 2 weeks, you might have any one employee or team member call off. It's just always happens on your team. It's not ever the same person, but there's always at least one call off. You're going to build that into your team's velocity.
So
you
it's
know.
capacity. And the other thing that can do for you actually is, and it worked for us in the past on various teams, So yeah, you've got this stuff coming in, these support tickets, and then you've got whoever asking, why can't you get more work done? Well, you show them the data and you say, look, here's where we're being spread across, and this is eating into our capacity. So if you want us to get more work done, bring in a couple more developers, that sort of thing. So it can help with that kind of stuff too, if the resources are available. Any other questions before I hand it over to Lisa? Really good questions today.
I need 6 volunteers. And if I don't get volunteers, I will assign because I'm a project manager.
She's going to be handing out prizes, so make
Yeah,
sure
yeah,
that
you get
rate us
rewarded.
really well on
I
that
am a
feedback.
reward project manager. I believe in rewarding my teams, so you will get rewarded. If you can hand this back and hand another one back to you.
Did you have a question?
And over here.
Volunteer, volunteer.
I've still got 3 more open slots here on my team. So,
Has anyone here played planning poker in the past? One couple of individuals.
I have one more. I'm serious, you get rewarded. Good. Suckers. Oh, I have a mic. You heard that. Okay. So while we play on poker, I think it would really be helpful for me to show you how you can use Trello.
How many of you use Trello?
Okay, Trello, for you, those that aren't familiar, it's free, okay? There are some limits to the free version. The paid version, I'd love to invest in myself because I use it for my home too. So Trello out of the box, the free version, it's missing some functionality for really planning and doing this little poker fun thing that we're gonna do. But there is a plugin that you can get for your browsers. It has Chrome, Firefox, and Safari. So you can get this nice little Scrum plugin for Trello, and you can install it on your browser, and that gives you some additional features. There's also another one, but I find it a little quirky in some of the browsers and stuff, so I kind of stay away from it a little bit. What I'm going to show you, though, is not necessarily Scrum. I'm going to do this in a little bit of a Kanban type iteration approach. So I'll explain that to you a little bit as we go. So right now what we're going to do is we're going to play poker. Those that are participating, you have a set of cards. Those cards have the numbers that Rose showed you earlier, right? But there's also 2 additional ones. There's an infinity, which you hardly ever use. You can use it. Some teams want it because they just cannot estimate. They just think that this is going on and on and on and on. At that point, I stop the discussion and say, okay, we need to think about this a little bit. This sounds like a separate project of its own. So, but it's available. There's also a question mark. The team members can put up the question mark, and then we can have some more discussion on the stories that we're going to review. When we play poker, what we're going to do is I'm going to read you a user story. Each user story has a definition of done. What do we need to do? So when we're testing our final product, how do we know that we've completed this user story? So we're going to review that. Then I want those that have the cards to pick a number. Do not display it until I tell you to, because it's your opinion is just as valuable as another person's opinion, and I want to see what your feelings are on that story point assignment. Remember, it's complexity and effort. If something has a database component to it, you're not a database person, your numbers might not match a database person's, you know? Maybe it's a UX design question and you don't know anything about UX, that's okay. We're going to have a discussion and we're going to come up with a story point value. So the first story. As a user, I need to be able to have a knowledge base on how to put in a request to have my motherboard replaced. I'm not a Mac tech person. I use a Mac, that's about it. So some of these might be a little bit quirky. So the description of done is down here in my description area. A knowledge base is written, edited by an editor, and published to the website. So for those of you that are completing or competing on this, no, that's not the word I want, participating in this process, I want you to go ahead and select your card. I'm going to count to 4, And when I get to 4, because I don't like 3, we're going to have you show your numbers to everyone. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So we see a variety. I have a 1, a couple 2s, a 3, and an 8. So what I do at this point as the project manager or the scrum master, I'm going to say 1 and 8. The rest of you can fold down. Number 1. Why do you think it's a number 1?
I don't think there's a lot of effort involved or complexity.
Okay. Number 8. Why do you think that's an 8?
It involves more people and people that are probably outside of my team, like the editor and deploying to a website.
Ah.
Situation that can infinitely complicate meeting the definition done.
So complexity is a little bit higher. Okay. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Okay. Any room for some new thoughts here on that?
Well, I think it's very interesting what she said. I didn't consider any of that because in my organization we're very small. Wouldn't take there's not a lot of that's not an issue for us. Where in a large organization it could be.
Okay. So let's do this. I want you guys, given everything that we just talked about, let's redo it. Ready? 4 or 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm closer.
Interesting.
She doesn't budge, but it's interesting.
We can talk about the factors. Like if this is where I would ask my team to say, well, Emily, you're new, and actually this is a button that you push when you're ready, so you're in control. And then I would have brought my score down. I need more information.
Okay, so project manager comes in and says, you're right. Our editors and staff, we're going to use our own editor, and the editor is going to be able to push the button for you.
The editor's pushing the button.
The editor is pushing the button.
Oh, then I want to stay at 8. If I'm not in control of it, then I
This isn't, okay, this isn't your level of complexity or effort. Okay? This is the team level of effort and complexity. So is it hard for the editor? It's hard for you to give up control. Okay? But what if you were the editor?
It's not effort, complexity plus stress.
Yeah. What if you were the editor?
Then it brings it way down.
Okay. Let's do this again. Ready? And yours is probably going to stay the same. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. I am down to where I have 1, 2, and the rest 3s.
At that point, it's a 3.
It's a 3. So what's nice about, oh, Rose, you don't have the Scrum for Trello installed.
Uh-oh.
I forgot about that.
You could, if you want to go ahead and log in.
Oh.
Yeah, just go ahead and.
So, yeah, because I really want to, I can't log in for you.
You want to use
It's
your
on the
laptop?
browser, yeah.
Yeah, just.
Because I really want you to see this, because this is really cool, and at some point you're going to see the little bit of a burn down happening.
So while Lisa's swapping out and using her MacBook, for those of you who've used Trello, it's a nifty tool. I've actually used it on some smaller projects. It was owned by Fog Creek, which is a very nice little company, but it was back, I think in January, it was bought by Atlassian, and Atlassian has the suite that includes Jira. Anybody in here Jira users? I love Jira. Jira is Trello is an excellent tool, and Jira is like Trello on steroids. You can do some seriously great iterative work using Jira or Trello.
So what this allows me to do is, because I had the plugin, I didn't have the ability to click these numbers. So because of the plugin, I can now say, we've estimated the points to be a 3.
I'm hoping that that's a lie, what it's saying up there for you to reload.
That's okay, I can add the 3. Nope, the 3's
You're
there.
good.
So I have my 3 up there. And now in my backlog column, you can see that I have 3 story points in my backlog. Okay? Backlog is where we put everything before we start working on them and start prioritizing our work. The next story. As a technician, I need to have the knowledge base on how to replace a motherboard. Definition of done. Complete article is published containing images and diagrams. You can even see I've added some tasks up there to help you with this. Okay? You can still be the editor. Okay? So, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Wow. That's quite a
Okay.
variance.
So I'm going to go with the 13 and the 2. Okay? 2. Why do you think it's only a 2?
Because I was looking at something else at the time and I just held up a number.
Where's my 3? Do I have a 3? Okay, over there, 3. Why is it a 3?
Because I think one person, or at least the team, is mostly gonna own this. And I'm assuming that we have a high degree of familiarity with the territory, and it's just writing down what we collectively know.
Okay.
Again, I'd love my team to tell me.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. You're 13. Why 13?
I think it's gonna take a while for them to put together all the pictures, the diagrams.
Editor, do you have the pictures already? Or do you?
A good amount of stock photo for that, yeah.
Of the insides of the machines and how to take this apart.
This BS and you're role playing. You're allowed. Does that change your number if she has the images and diagrams?
Depends on what version of machine are we talking about. Because if it's a brand new machine, you may not have these pictures.
2GS?
You talk Mac like I talk Mac.
Because I mean, it takes time to put all these pictures together and make sure you have
I'm a
all the screwdrivers and the right size screw torque and all that
Yeah.
listed. I mean,
You're changing
I've
my
seen
perception
all.
of what the diagram looks like, yeah.
Have you ever looked at iFixit, their videos and their take apart guide? I've seen them and they go into great detail,
So, and I'm taking, if I need a knowledge base, there must not be one out there. That means it must be a newer one. So the discussion has brought out that this is a newer machine. We don't have a knowledge base, and we don't have the images and the diagrams pulled together in a central resource for us to use.
Plus, you're going to want to test that article once, like run it by a user or two. And that takes some time. And
you want to make sure you take it apart and put it back together and make sure it works.
there is that.
Yeah.
There's any screws.
That's right. Hidden work.
Wouldn't that be another task added?
Yes. And why won't it
Yeah.
let me add a task?
So that's the other thing that Planning Poker can do is help to identify hidden work.
Are you on the wrong machine?
Oh, yeah, I am. Yes, so I need newer machine requires newer images and diagrams.
Yeah, I would,
Need extensive testing of article prior to publishing. Right? The last thing we want to do is publish something that isn't going to work for our text. Okay, so now we've got nailed down some more requirements and more information because of discussion, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4. 5, 8's 5, 13. I want that 5 and 13. I have 2 5s, so the 5's and the 13, I want to have a discussion. Why 13?
Scope changed. There's more work than there was the first time. You added 2 new tasks. I was at 8, now I'm at 13.
Oh, okay. Valid point. 5's? Why only a 5?
I was already assuming that you'd have to do a lot of testing. I've done a lot of writing of articles and have firsthand experience knowing people misread. What you thought you wrote is not always what you actually wrote. But beyond that, if you've got a team that's got the knowledge, you're since the last one was only a 3, this one really only adds additional testing and some photos. So we're not adding a huge amount of complexity above and beyond the last story we were talking about.
Let me turn to my editor and ask her a question. Do you have a photographer on staff that can help us with the photos? Okay. Let me turn to my team real quick. Have any of you guys replaced a motherboard in one of these newer computers yet? Oh, so we have some experience, okay.
I'm gonna pick on this as an example, because if everyone in this room is at a Mac shop and you're self-servicing, Apple provides all of this.
Now.
That would make it a 0.
You may be breaking warranty, so you can't even touch this.
Okay, this is a PC. This is a PC.
Oh, then it's going to be a 40.
This is a Dell. This is a Dell. Okay, let's pretend, okay? But that's a valid point at a MacAdmin conference. You wouldn't be touching the motherboard in this.
Well, no, you could be, but Apple would be providing it.
The
So
documentation and
what you would do
support.
is you'd bring this down to a lot
So
less.
maybe, we're at a MacAdmin conference. It is a Mac. Maybe that changes everything, guys. We now have existing documentation. So all we need to do is publish to a website the existing documentation, right?
That sounds like a 0
Not
or a
allowed
1.
to. You have to
Yeah,
decide
violate
that
copyright.
Your tech has to touch it, so the person who's the technician in this case would simply go into the Apple.
Log into their
software thing,
website.
Use all that information
But,
and get that out.
so you have a technician that you're bringing on board that's
Correct.
trained in everything.
Correct.
But I need to have a resource available for him to know where to go to get that.
Right, so that's it. Well,
Okay?
yeah.
And
So it's
speaking of-
really changed now.
Speaking of numbers, we have 4 minutes left in this session.
Yes.
You can't publish Apple's documentation without Apple's.
Right. Well, and that's what we're saying. What we're going to have to do is basically have an FAQ somewhere
Just like
internal.
go to the Apple site login.
That
and
just
link
links
it here.
Yes. So we've really narrowed it down. So now we're not going to publish the article. We're not going to have an editor to review it. We're not going to write the details. We're not going to obtain any images. So this one, now we're down. We don't need images. We don't need to test it either, right? So all we need to do is, this
Publish
isn't
the
even
link.
existing. We're going to just change this to provide resource link
That
to
sounds
tech.
like a 1 or maybe even a 0.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. We're going to go with a half on that.
So we might want to switch back to the slides and show the, there are some additional resources.
Well, let me just go real quick and show them
Okay.
this, because this is really exciting. So I just put these in the backlog, okay? If I was working on this as a team, you would have many in the backlog. In Kanban, every team member can only work on, Kanban is a variety of Agile. So in Kanban, every team member can only work on 4 stories at one time, okay? So what they would do is they would drag their story in. I've tagged this to Joe Smith. Joe would have 4 stories in progress. When he's finished with that, see how that story point moves?
And why is that limit important? Can anybody tell? Can anyone share why it's good to limit that in progress column to like,
4 per team member.
why do you think? I'll tell you why. Multitasking sucks.
Yeah.
You want to throttle back multitasking as much as you can, because if you've got a couple of real multitaskers on your team, they're going to start on a whole bunch of stories. And the whole idea is to stop that starting and finish before you start something else. Your team will be much more sane and more productive too. So that WIP limit, work in progress limit, can be pretty useful.
But now Joe's not responsible for testing, so it's off his plate. It's moved on. But maybe testing came up, and now Joe needs to move this back because they found an issue with the story. Think technical, there could be issues. It goes now in progress. If Joe has 4 or if he has more than 4 things in that column, the team needs to decide. Joe needs to back one of those out. Either move something else into testing or move something back to the backlog.
59 seconds.
Okay.
All right, just quickly, we will share these slides out with you, and when you do get these slides, hello. There is some further reading here that you can explore. And again, feel free to contact us with any questions, thoughts, rants. And if you've got pen and paper, you can even jot down the locale of these slides. They're going to live on Google Slides forever and ever and ever. Very good.
And also, they are recording this session, so you'll be able to get it off the MacAdmin site too.
So you've been a great crowd. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. for the great
Oh,
questions.
participation prizes. And you can tell because I could not remove the clearance sticker, I went really cheap, but fun.
So enjoy your selfie thingies and enjoy the rest of the conference. And thank you so much. You were a terrific crowd.
Thank you, guys.